Hello, I'm Alexander Rose, the Executive Director here at Long Now. I'm joined today by Debrah Otchere, all the way from Ghana through our partnership with the Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Sciences. Eric has been studying the way work and sonic spaces come together through his work at the University of Cape Coast, where he is the chair of the Department of Music and Dance. Welcome, Debrah Otchere.
Thank you very much, Zenda, for the warm introduction. It's really an honor to be part of the Long Now talk, and I'm happy for the invitation. Now, think for a moment about the sounds that people make when they are involved in physically exacting activities. Weightlifting, martial arts, tennis, tug of war, you name them. Sounds such as ah, ooh, Well, these sounds are universal. Sometimes, these sounds are even involuntary, monosyllabic, and most of the time, actually non-lexical because they are not words that you can look the meaning up in a dictionary. But these words are functional. These sounds contribute to the total achievement of the goals of the work. These sounds are evolutionary adaptations. Think for a moment about what happens in the human gas exchange process. When we breathe in or we breathe out, the production of these sounds such as ah, oh, these sounds that accompany manual labor or when people work, and these sounds that come out. These sounds, they require contraction of the diaphragm, which pushes out stale or deoxygenated air from the lungs quicker than would happen in normal breathing. At the same time, the open mouth allows for a bigger swoop of oxygen intake, which gets into the bloodstream and supports the muscles involved in the execution of the task to function more effectively. The timing of the sound is equally important. They occur at the point when the exertion of the energy is needed the most. That is at the individual level. Individuals involved in hard tasks and making these sounds. But what happens when the work involves a coordinated effort with more than one person? Making the sounds at different points will definitely result in noise, which will be counterproductive. Exerting the energies at different points in time will lead to less productivity. Synchronization then becomes very necessary. Sounds are synchronized to provide reference points for the exertion of energies which result in higher productivity. You can think about the 1, 2, 3 hip-ho or such other verbal cues that call on people to coordinate their efforts and apply their energies at the same time. Synchronization of sound for extended periods, after all, appears to be a unique human trait. Now, imposing some kind of order on the sound, which is the pitches, in time, which is rhythm, is perhaps the minimum definition of music. The context described show how people use sound or how they constitute sonic spaces, how they pace themselves within these sonic spaces that they have created in order to attain the most of a specified activity. It is quite easy to assume that the ultimate function of music, at least in the context of group work, is to provide reference points for synchronized activity. Right about now, I think it's important to have a look at some of these songs and what I'm talking about. Obviously, there is a large body of examples to draw on when it comes to music and work, ranging from cooperative singing in the work that requires coordinated group activity, for example, fishing, farming, pounding, through religion, music in the context of marketing and consumer behavior, to technologically enhanced, more personalized use of music, such as in the use of headphones while jogging or learning while engaged in some kind of cognitive activity. There is quite a substantial amount of literature that exists on work songs in general with that label, or labor songs or occupational songs, incidental music. Depending on the author, these names have been used interchangeably, and the sources include ethnomusicological accounts, travel literature, anthropological writings, slave narratives, historical accounts, archival materials, the work of psychologists and scientists, myths and legends. The sources are many: folklore, biographies and memoirs, labor union writings, archaeological evidence, business tracts, speculations of philosophers, sociology, songbooks, recordings, and so on. All these are sources, rich sources that have documented what the label of work songs are. And I'm careful in this presentation not to use the label work songs for a number of reasons that I will explain later. Today's presentation, I am trying to use and focus on aspects of my fieldwork that are based on group music making as evidenced in the songs of indigenous seine net fishermen in Ghana. They go back many generations into history, centuries. Because of this, they offer a good platform to interrogate the changes that happen over time. The repertoire has influenced over the years other musical styles and has also been influenced by same. We are possibly staring at the final moments of some of these singing traditions. And so there is a need to start from there, to learn as much as we can from them, and record it for posterity before it totally disappears. These are fishermen, examples of the songs that they sing along the shores when they are engaged in their work. Ghana is a West African country bordered on the north by Burkina Faso, in the east by Togo, in the west by Côte d'Ivoire, and then in the south by the northeasternmost part of the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Guinea, which borders the southern part of the country. This southern part, the coastal stretch, is about 528 kilometers and harbors about 200 communities whose indigenous occupation is fishing. And fishing not in a very mechanized sense, but fishing in the traditional sense, where they use local materials, the seine net that they go, or the drag net, they go and cast the net, and then they come ashore, and for hours they try to pull this net ashore. So as I mentioned, there are about 200 communities that are involved in this small-scale artisanal fishing. It employs about 10% of the population, which according to our last census, estimates about 3 million people. The fishery subsector accounting for about 5% of Ghana's agricultural production in all. There are many ethnic groups in Ghana, but the dominant ethnic groups that populate these shores, as I mentioned, are 4. And they are positioned mostly in 4 of the administrative regions of the country, namely the Volta region, being the border of Ghana with Togo, Greater Accra region, which is the capital of Ghana, the Central region, which was the colonial capital city of Ghana, and then the Western region, which shares a border with Côte d'Ivoire. And within these regions are ethnic dominant groups. So the Ewe people populate the Volta region, the Ga populate the Greater Accra region, the Fanti, subset of the Akan group, they populate the Central region, and then we have the Nzima who populate the Western region. So here is an example of a song sung by a migrant community, Ewe community, living in the Biakro, a village close to the University of Cape Coast. And the title of the song is Amayele Eko. These indigenous fishermen, in many of the coastal towns, they used to propel their canoes and boats through manual rowers who sang as they rowed to the sea. Now, because of technology and because of modernization, many of them have bought and adopted the use of outboard motors. And because of that, the place of the manual rowing, which involved the singing and the musical practices, has now changed. And so a lot of the repertoire that was used for rowing has now found its way into other repertoires, many of which have now found their way into the repertoire of the pulling song and not the rowing songs. And this is one of the reasons that I dare say that we are probably looking at one of the last generations of this fishing tradition. So what they do now is they go and cast the net a few hundred meters from the shore in a loop. They come back to the shore, and with the help of the seine nets and ropes, very long ropes, they pull the catch ashore. And this is always done to music. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the songs that the fishermen employ in executing their work. And I'm going to do so using three main dimensions: what the music says in terms of its symbolic and referential meaning, what the music does in terms of its pragmatic and functional meaning, and then what the music is in terms of its aesthetic and non-referential meaning. The main approach to studying these fishermen songs, has been a polyvocal ethnography approach. On-site recordings at the shore, where we record the music in the context of the work, but also bringing them to the studio. And then we do the initial sorting and theming, and we go back to do interviews and feed the themes that we have analyzed into the interviews in order to gain a deeper understanding of the work. So I will just start first from what the music says in terms of the referential and symbolic meaning. And here, emphasis is on the words, the lyrics, perhaps the sounds. Can distinguish between two main kinds of text in the songs. One, which are lexical words, which form the majority of the songs, about 85% of them. You have, lexical words which are used, and these are words with specific meanings in the language, in the dominant language, in which the music is sung. And then we also have a good number of non-lexical vocalizations. These are sounds like what I intimated earlier, which have no meanings in themselves in terms of a dictionary definition, but which are used a lot, which find their way in the music. Proverbs, anthropomorphisms, idiomatic expressions, allusions, metaphors, repetitions, personifications, zoomorphisms, anthropomorphisms, and on and on. A lot of literary features, literary devices. And these are markers of a very sophisticated culture. Because of these features, the construction of meaning from the text is very delicate and complex. Over time, these fisherfolk have developed a kind of sub-language, which I refer to as the fisher's tongue. Now, the distinctive features of the fisher's tongue lie more in the manner in which the words are articulated than in the lexicon itself. The manner in which they mention the words and the structure of the phrases is quite difficult to understand even for so-called native speakers of the dominant language who are not part of the fisherfolk. So in general, many of the words sound muffled. Consonants are attenuated or elided. Words are deliberately used in contexts which are incongruous to the regular language. Many of the borrowed words are deliberately misappropriated, or should I say appropriated, so that even when one recognizes the language from which the word was borrowed, the words do not necessarily mean the same thing in the fisher's tongue. Furthermore, several words are laden with ambiguities and are often interspersed with jargon and a lot of non-lexical vocalizations. Now, this deliberate use of ambiguities have a purpose, and the purpose is, among them, one of what Turner refers to as multivocality or multivocalic signifiers. The ability to creatively have systems where you can have multiple meanings at the same time. And that is a safety feature. Devereux calls that the repudiability principle. It enables them to speak about sensitive issues, and yet when they are taken on, they can repudiate and say they weren't even talking about that. And for them, this is very liberating because the work is along the shores, which is an open space where anybody can go. It's a public space. So the ability to create this fisher's tongue and the ability to use all these features of the language help them to communicate among themselves and without the understanding of who are not meant to hear. So it helps them to channel the information for their listeners. I would just like to give one example from the translations. And basically what the lead singer is saying is that I am just a simple man singing a simple song. Because I get wet from the sea, my sweat is hardly noticed. I am not the one who made promises for votes. But when the frog feels the heat from the pepper that the lizard has eaten, it is worth talking about. I don't know what I'm even talking about. I'm just singing a simple song. In the second verse of this, the singer goes on to say, I am just a simple man singing a simple song. Because I am not all dressed up in suit and tie, I am hardly noticed. I am not the one who trades sex for favors. But when the food is put on the chair and the table is used as the seat, it is worth talking about. I don't know what I am saying. I'm just singing a simple song. Now, in the last line of each of the verses that I read, the singer claims that he doesn't know what he's saying. But the content of the song is popular knowledge. It is news, mainstream news. Some of it are political issues about government appointees who are appointed on the basis of sex, or who the general public think that they are not qualified, but because of certain reasons they are appointed. And so songs like this help them to give and run commentaries about rather sensitive issues. And then because of these features that I already mentioned, if you take them on, they will say they were not even talking about that. This is the element of repudiability that I'm talking about. So the development of this unique language, this fisher's tongue, among the fishermen is a conscious attempt to own their physical and expressive space, to create privacy in a public domain. For the fishermen, it is quite liberating to build this kind of world where they freely express themselves and vent their emotions without undue interference. The themes of the fishing songs are many and varied. They sing about family, they sing about love, friendship, religion, betrayal, belief in supernatural and preternatural powers, death, life after death, marriage, divorce, polygamy, infidelity, politics, and they chant a lot of obscenities as well, something that you will not find in the day-to-day lives of the people. So it seems that in the context of the music, there is a lot more that they can do, which outside of the music, you will not find them doing. And this speaks a lot to Levitin's model. In his popular book, The World in Six Songs, he gives reasons for how music may have evolved and how it may have insinuated itself in human heads over centuries. And he does so talking about mostly emotions. And I find that all these, the joy, love, comfort, knowledge, religion, friendship, are reflected and deep-seated in the kinds of music that are being sung. A lot of the content, the lyrical content, they have types of typologies, having sort of essential labels of what they are, who they are, without, and as being a conservative people, without any conscious attempt at actually getting out of these. And the songs and the content of the songs reinforce these kinds of social labels. So types of workers, personalities, and they are conservative, they enact the same scenarios, fitting themselves within these rather essentialist frames and reproducing a sense of false identity, or perhaps living to fit within these established frames. By so doing, attitudes to worldview, gender, relations, sustainable development, belief system are reinforced and are entrenched in the music of these fisherfolk. So many of them have even the belief that if you are rich, you don't have to show it, because then other people in the community can harm you. And so they continue to perpetrate this idea of poverty. Of course, it is not to say that all is rosy. And many of them are actually not canoe owners. So there are people who own the canoes and who own their fishing equipment. So they do the work and they have to account. And the owners of the canoe, who are the supposed rich men, they become richer, because when the catch is divided, they get a bigger portion of it. So they have a lot of songs where they criticize this, but in a very subtle way, because they also don't want to lose their jobs. And music offers them that space to vent all their disagreements and all their built up emotions. Here is an example of a song that shows the state in which the fishermen find themselves, the kind of negativity or the negative violence, as I mentioned. And this one is entitled Money No Dey Come.
Money no dey come, hey money no dey come, hey money no dey come, hey money no dey come, every day man no time. Double money no dey come, hey money no dey come, money no dey come, hey money no dey come, every day man no tire.
I'm going to talk about the non-lexical expressions for a minute. That why there are so many. At the beginning of the speech, I gave sort of a scenario about how the attempt to synchronize the individual sounds may have actually resulted in music and group singing. But The purpose of these non-lexical vocalizations do a bit more than I mentioned earlier. Among other things, these functions, they buy time while the workers think about new songs to raise. So in that sense, these are gap fillers. They add some kind of comic relief in the way that they are uttered and they are vocalized. They help to provide a steady tempo, encouraging group participation. Here is another example of songs, basically highlighting the use of the non-lexical vocalizations as I mentioned, and how they provide the reference points for coordinated activity. So actually, if you analyze the songs, you will realize that all these non-lexical vocalizations are those ones that occur at fixed intervals. And it is actually these ones that establish the pulse in the music, and that helps to provide a reference point for the coordinated activity. The parts that are lexical words, they overlap, and the calls, they overlap, and they are actually not in line with the tempo of the work itself. So the non-lexical vocalizations are short, repetitive, and they keep the pulse of the work going, and they provide a steady tempo. In addition to this, it helps to provide more participation because it is very simple. All you need to do is hear it once or twice and you can join. It doesn't require any pre-rehearsals. That means that in a work that requires a lot of hands, when the song is not too complicated, it becomes easier for other hands to join in and sing and join them and pull the work, make the work easier. So the coordination, covering up coded messages, and most importantly, increasing the output of the work are some of the functions of the non-lexical vocalizations. I now want to speak a little about what the music is. The fission songs that are sung actually reflect the identities or the musical identities of the major or dominant ethnic group among which the fishermen are located. So among the Ewe, you find markers of Ewe musical identity. Among the Gan, you may find same among the Akan and so on. So it follows the structures dominant in the ethnic groups that are involved. Most of the songs are percussive, and this is achieved by the use of these non-lexical vocalizations that I mentioned. And this is also may be informed by ecological factors. In southern Ghana, there are lots of trees, and so historically, the musical instruments that are dominant in southern Ghana are instruments, rhythmic instruments, rather than melodic or harmonic instruments. And this finds its way even in the vocal music that the people sing. So often, the music has rhythmic accompaniments, hand clapping, bells, bamboo, or even the side of the canoe, or idiophones, and so on, most of the time. Sometimes when they work, you see them clapping. The clapping is not just to provide accompaniment to the singing, but the clapping is also a way of getting their hands off momentarily from the ropes, which is quite hard and which can actually scar your palms. And when you have the sand getting attached to the ropes, it becomes very, very painful to pull. So when they clap or when they do some of these other activities through the music, they're actually not just entertaining themselves, but they're actually helping to complement and make the work a bit more easier. In terms of tonal organization, the music is based mostly on parallel octaves, which are sung in unison, and you have occasional cadential parallel fourths and fifths in the voice parts. Typical rhythmic patterns, as I have mentioned, imitate the main rhythmic patterns of the musical styles of the dominant group. So overall, most of the songs have a call and response form, and it's quite sung in quite a playful manner, in a style that has many unintelligible sounds. Now, the playfulness is not to say that they are talking about subjects which are not serious. They're actually talking about very serious subjects, but they do so in a playful way, in such a way that they don't stir up so much anger among them. Most of the songs have frames, and so the singing and enactment that you find at the shore are actually representative of the happenings within the communities themselves. Now, these frames help people to openly express themselves by alternating the text of the core part with current issues of concern in a very satiric manner. In this sense, the songs serve as a kind of moral control, a tool to keep each other in check. Because if you mess up, you know that you mess up or you do something that is not approved in the conventional sense, norms of the society, it will find its way in the songs the following morning, and everybody, will know what is happening or what you have done. In that sense, because they know there is this kind of check, it helps with moral and behavioral control. Some of the songs contain sexually explicit and evocative words. These are allowed in the context of the song as long as they remain at the shore in the context of work. And hence, this is why the sonic spaces I mentioned becomes very important. Because when they leave the shores, these same people will not even want to think about such things. And they do not encourage the use of profanity or chanting of sexually explicit content. But in the context of the song, it's quite liberating, and they're able to do that, and they chant it all the way. So the language is all involving. Because of the many years of working along the shore, the Fanti group, the Ga group, Ewe groups, they have cross paths. And these days, you find Ewe's almost along the shores of all the parts of Ghana. And where they find themselves in a predominant ethnic group, that becomes a place for actually interrogating how the languages and the cultures mix. Because within the songs, within the compositions itself, you find identities and markers of one ethnic group, using the musical markers of one ethnic group, but using the language or the text of another ethnic group. So the music of the Fisher folk is characterized by skillful spontaneity of organized sounds. They create with text and they conform to the tonal inflections of the groups. There are a lot of rhythmic alterations that happen, although we have a steady pulse that might be identified, but we have a lot of rhythmic alterations because of the multiple voices that they hear at the same time. And there is room for a lot of improvisation. These descriptors, as I have mentioned, they evoke some kind of Wittgensteinian conclusion. So what is music for them? What is music? Does it mean that anything else is music? Well, it will be considered as long as it bears a kind of family resemblance to other examples that are generally agreed to be music. What does the music do? I'll speak lastly on the pragmatic or the functional meaning of the songs. Up until now, the function of the music has been filtering through my talk in a number of ways. In the context of work, a key function of the music is to help them increase productivity. So that is the core. Among the Fisher folk, this happens through the provision of reference points for synchronized activity. But quite apart from that, all the other things that the music helps to accomplish have to do with the music managing or triggering the emotions of people and what the emotion can help to achieve. So if the music helps to excite them in a way that is positive, then they get positive outcomes. In a way, the music serves as a space for repairing relationships. There are examples of songs where people vent their misgivings as part of the work. As they work, they vent their misgivings, and there are actually times where you can find somebody else retorting, but all through song. And if you are just a casual observer, you might not notice this. This might totally elude you altogether. But in the context of song, they repair the broken relationships and they forge stronger social bonds. So there are a lot of implications I can think of for prices of music. For starters, the repertoires are actually finding their way into other musical modes, which are more current. So how some of these repertoires have found their way into other musical practices, which are very common today, and how they are using technology to modify some of these musical phrases. But quite apart from that, in terms of the function to which the music is put, and in terms of music helping to regulate emotions or help to manage emotions, that is still very much so in the use of music in other contexts. When people, for example, are running or reading and walking their dog, or when people want to get themselves, elevate themselves into certain states which help them to be more productive, they use music. And perhaps these examples are like antecedents of this kind of practice, just not in the communal setting, but more individualized use of that. I'm going to pause here for a minute, and then if there are questions that come up, then I can use it to elaborate further on some of the points that come. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. That was really fantastic. I'd love to invite you on where you're joining us all the way from Ghana, where we'll be pre-recording this Q&A to make sure that, that our connectivity is good and we're able to get to all the questions. Welcome, Eric, Debrah Otchere.
Thank you so much, Zander. My pleasure.
You bet. Well, thank you very much for doing this. I know it's tricky to do at this great distance. And you're one of the partners that we have through CASBS, the Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Science, with Stanford. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience of being a fellow during this very strange year. Were you able to connect with some of the other fellows and show your work with them?
Yes, very much so. In fact, the year at Stanford started quite bleakly. We weren't sure whether we were going to make it. I actually wrote a song about this that you can hear sometime. But we had a very great support from the CASBS team, and they managed to pull it off. We started virtually, and eventually some of the fellows were able to go to the Hill, but I couldn't make it to the Hill. In spite of that, we had weekly seminars, we had lunchtime seminars, we had virtual lunches and presentations, and quite some very good interaction with the fellows. So it was very, very worthwhile, and I got a lot from the fellowship. I can only imagine how it would have been like if I had actually come to the Hill.
Do we know what the earliest field recordings of this kind of music is? How far back do the recordings themselves go?
In terms of the recordings, I only have from the 50s that we have examples, but there are recordings which are not video recordings that date back to about 1928, thereabout. And we have some of the fishermen songs filtering into other kinds of the very early recordings of a Ghanaian genre of music we call high life music. And that is basically a mixture of traditional language, indigenous languages mixed with when during the era of colonialism, some instruments such as the harmonica or the guitar were acquired. And so you have the local rhythms and the local melodies being played in a different context with different instruments. And so basically you have some of the local melodies, traditional melodies, transposing and finding their way into even the concert halls. And so from these earlier recordings, there are a few of the fishermen songs that actually made their way. And if you refer to, for example, one of the recordings that you have the Zamina Mina Yakwabo, you have that one. So that's a fisherman song. You now find it in the context, for example, of a military parade where you have the brass band playing that, and you have it arrangements of that for the big time choral choirs on stage with orchestra and all that. So we have earliest recordings of these filtering in popular musical repertoires way back from 1928. I think that's the earliest recording that
almost a century
so far, that I know about.
And what's your understanding of how far back some of these traditions go? I mean, I assume it's thousands of years.
Yes, I could say thousands of years. This particular practice where they go to sea and they cast the net and they come back to haul for hours is not the only style of fishing that is in Ghana. There are some of the fishing styles where they go to sea mostly with the bigger vessels, and they catch the fish, and then before they come back to shore. And that doesn't involve long hours of having to use the seinets to haul the fish ashore. And so that doesn't usually have this kind of singing. It may have other forms of singing. But the style that we are talking about now, that I discussed, is believed to have been introduced by the Ewe group, and the Ewes are found in the southeastern part of Ghana. You find them also in Togo and Benin, and they are believed to have actually migrated somewhere into Ghana somewhere in the 15th century. And they are believed to have started this particular style of fishing. And so I think that at least if it doesn't go before that, we can trace it back all the way to the 15th, sometime in the 15th century, just in Ghana.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned a few times of how these songs cross into taboo subjects or subjects of, almost revolutionary subjects. And I know that, that happened with some of the African diaspora in the United States with slavery, that they were using songs as these kind of express revolutionary or ideas that they couldn't express publicly. Can you talk more about how that's, what are these subjects? Is this sexual? Is it revolutionary? Or is it both?
Yes, that's quite a lot. And the music, I should say, permeates almost every aspect that you can imagine. There is a recording we made quite recently along the fishing lines. There was, so it's an interesting story. We went to the shore. The local folk, when it comes to COVID, for example, they have a traditional belief that along the seashores, people don't really get infected. So among the fishing communities, the wearing of nose mask and so on is not very common. So we went to one of these communities to do a recording, and apparently the crew, me and my team, were the only people really wearing the nose masks. So you could just quite tell that we were not natives. And there and then somebody improvised a song about COVID and about we wearing So he sang this song, and on the surface of it, it sounded as if we heard something that sounded like he was making a mistake, that he couldn't pronounce these words well. Where he was going between saying coronavirus and colonial bylaws, right? And it's easy to just laugh it off because you think he's making a mistake. But way after we have returned, I got his contact and I've been talking to him. And actually what he is talking about is actually saying coronavirus on one hand and colonial bylaws on the other hand. Colonial bylaws. And the continuation of the song is actually he was making a comment about LGBTQI. That became a hot topic in Ghana because they set up offices and we have like a majority of the population still against institutionalizing or passing a law to allow LGBTQ, IA and all that. So it's a sensitive area that people don't really comment on. And so in the context of the song, right, what he was doing was interchanging coronavirus and colonial bylaws. And the conversation with him, he was saying that the imposition or Ghana trying to implement the LGBTQI laws is more like being puppets in the hands of our colonialists, right? That we are long past the era of colonialism, but there are people behind the scenes who are pulling the strings. And so Ghana is trying to dance to their tune. And so, he was saying basically it's an insult or an indictment on the government or those in power who are trying to implement or pass a law on LGBT, legitimizing LGBT, QI. And so ordinarily you won't be able to say that openly to anybody, but he says that in the context of song. Right. And in a way that if you were to take him on, he can easily say, no, I was talking about coronavirus. But the continuation of the song, right, I think it would be nice to send you that video as well. He says, coronavirus, kolo bylaws. And then what follows, he says, what's a yendeda, which literally means that they are trying to force men to lie, together. But we are against that and we won't do it. So he's talking about this very sensitive topic. And it was around the time when the office that was set up for the LGBTQI in Accra was burnt down. And so that was, so some of these areas where they can easily create a song to talk about. But quite apart from that, they talk about politics. So obviously they talk about sex. They talk about what they believe in, the worldview, what the expectations of men and women, what, clear lines of inheritance. But they also encode knowledge. So what is the oral history of the people and in song, so that if you really analyze a number of the songs, we say they are knowledge songs. They are songs about where they came from, because now we talk about a lot of groups that have migrated from one place to the other. And some of those who are living there were born there. They have never really gone back to their hometown. But within the context of the songs, if you analyze the text carefully, it means that if they ever have to go back to their hometown, it gives them cues about who their great ancestor was and where they can find what within the community. So in a way, they are not just singing this, but it's a way of passing down their true history from one generation to the other. And other things are, you did mention the sexual content. Actually, when they return from the shore, from outside the context of work, and they come home, there are things that are no, you will never hear from them, because particularly the men, they are the enforcers of discipline. And one of the things that they consider as discipline is the abstinence from sexual talk, pretty much. But when they go out and they are singing, in the context of the work, they actually have quite an unbelievably large number of songs that have, sexual subtext. And they do that. But the same people, once the music is over and the work is over, it's like drawing a clear line and saying, okay, that is over now. We are home and we can't talk about some of these things. So actually, there are a lot of examples that go a number of ways, right? Talking about slavery, talking about sex, talking about politics, talking about gender roles, talking about their oral culture and traditions and histories and so on, but also comforting each other and so on. Quite a number of ways.
One of the things you mentioned is that some of the new technologies of agriculture as well as fishing is changing the future of this. And looking at your videos, there's very few children I noticed participating as kind of a next generation. What's your take on how the next generation is learning, as well as how some of these technologies may be endangering these forms?
Yeah, I think that modernity has had its toll on this singing tradition, and it might be fair to even say that perhaps in the next 10 years, these songs will be very difficult to find anywhere at all. One, because of technology, and this is how I see it. So there is some kind of, I would say, social distinction. Many of the fishermen that we find today are people who did not go too high, climb high in the academic, in terms of formal education. And so they often see themselves as, lower class or a particular class of people. But they are working hard to send their children now to school. And if you speak to the younger generation, they help their parents now to do the work. In some of the videos that I send, you may find very little children involved in the work, because this is how it's an acculturative process. They learn while they are young, but many of the youth now, if you talk to them, it is not something they would like to pursue. It is not something that they would like to do as a career, like their parents. And so just from the interactions with the youth, that is one of the ways in which we can tell that this particular, not fishing always will have a future, but large-scale fishing perhaps, or different modes of fishing, rather than this particular type where, the music accompanies. The other form is that they now use outboard motors. So they have these outboard motors that they attach to the canoes, and which they are able to, which makes the work easier, particularly going to sea, because they usually ride against the waves, and it's quite difficult to get into the sea. So before, for many years, they were doing that with synchronized activity. You had a lot of people who had to paddle, and because particularly for the reference point and the synchronized activities, it was fair that, they had a lot of songs that they used to row. So these were rowing songs, right? Now, because of the outboard motors, they don't need as many people to go to sea to cast the net. So these days you find 3, even 4 people just going to cast the net, and they don't do that to music any longer. So the rowing songs, the songs that they used to sing when they were rowing, you hardly find them. Even now in my field work, we have to assemble the older generation who know some of the songs to just sing these songs to us, although they are very similar. But many of these rowing songs have now found their way in the songs that they sing when after they have gone to cast the net and they are pulling the nets. And so you can see that rowing songs are already obsolete. What they have now is the pulling or the hauling songs, right? And now with emerging technologies, there are actually commercial fishing places where they use certain machines to even haul the net. And if that catches on, we can say that we may not need as many people to do that work. And as long as that synchronized activity is not really necessary, then I am afraid to say that the songs, some of them, of course, may find their way in other repertoires, but a lot of them, that practice that we are seeing right now, the music in the context of that work, it faces extinction, imminent extinction. And also there is the rise of multinational fishing companies, and they are able to go to deep sea and they catch bigger fish and they sell it for less, right? So they are also putting those who are doing all this arduous work out of business. So people they have sale points where if you want bigger fish and all that people go and buy. So gradually, it is not very attractive, let me put it that way. And so people are rather venturing away from that.
Well, I want to thank you so much. This has been really, really great to have you. And I'm hoping at some point that I can come to Ghana. I've always wanted to
That would
go.
be nice.
And hopefully at some point you can come here as well. So it would be great to meet you.
Most
At
definitely.
some point.
Most definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Linda.
And I want to thank you all for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you at our next talk. Thank you.